Hello, everybody. Welcome to NYC Friday Fix. I'm Thom Powers, the artistic director of the NYC Festival. As some of you know, in the past month, we held a series of free webinars for documentary filmmakers. We offered our thoughts on how filmmakers are moving ahead with distribution, getting cash flow, and promoting new films. Those experiences gave us the idea for this Friday Fix. We can't fix everything, but we can give you a fix of interviews from the filmmakers we admire. This came together quickly in the last few days. I'm deeply grateful to all the people who made it happen, especially the folks at Netflix, David Magdale and Associates, and Firelight Media. For this first episode, we have three guests. First, we'll have Liz Garbus. She's an executive producer, along with Alex Gibney and Roger Ross Williams, on the new series, The Innocence Files, about wrongfully convicted prisoners who are released. Last month, Liz also made her fiction debut on Netflix with the film Lost Girls, based on a true story. Our second guest is Rachel Mason. Her film Circus of Books examines the history of the iconic Los Angeles bookstore, known for its back room of gay pornography. The store, Circus of Books, was owned by Rachel's parents. Her film covers a history of the gay community, including the worst years of AIDS. It's also a story about family secrets. Circus of Books premiered at last year's Tribeca Film Festival, and it came out this week on Netflix. Finally, our third guest will be Loida Limbaugh. Many of you know her from Firelight Media, the Harlem-based documentary center, where she's the senior vice president of programs. For years, Loida has been helping other documentary filmmakers through Firelight's fellowships. Now she's completed her first doc feature called Through the Night, about a child daycare center. Her film was selected for this year's Tribeca Film Festival. Before I get to our guests, let me go over some housekeeping tips for Crowdcast. We encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat box on the right. Tell us where you're from. If you have nice things to say about our guests, please share your thoughts during their segments. If you experience video delay, go to the help menu on the top right and switch to compatibility mode. The best browser for Crowdcast we find is Chrome, and you may also improve your connection by closing other windows. We all know video conferencing is prone to tech hiccups. If we experience any issues, we'll try to notify you in the chat section. Usually we can fix problems within a few minutes. This video will be recorded, so afterwards you can share the link for later viewing. Now I'm gonna bring up our first guest, Liz Garbus. I lost her for a second, so let me bring her to screen. All right, Liz, I just invited you back. While I'm waiting for Liz to join us, let me tell you about the two new projects that she has in the last month, both on Netflix. We're going to start by talking about The Innocence Files, a 9-part series that she executive produced along with Alex Gibney and Roger Ross Williams. This series, there you are, Liz. Can you hear me? No, I can't hear you now for a second.
Oh, no, I'm here.
I can hear you.
Okay, I think I tried to sign twice because you couldn't hear me, but here I am. I think we're good.
Right.
Yeah, are we good?
Okay. We're good.
Okay.
We're good. We're live.
Okay.
So I'm just going to say a few more words about your project on the Innocence Files. You're looking at the DNA testing that's helped to exonerate hundreds of innocent people from prison. There was a review on Vox by Alyssa Wilkinson, who said The Innocence Files is amongst the strongest documentary series about criminal justice I've ever seen, end quote. And today during COVID-19, many of us are complaining about being locked up. But I think in this series, we can check that feeling against the conditions of real prisons in America. The series is showing recurring patterns that lead to convictions of the innocent. Those factors include bad evidence, mistaken witnesses, and corrupt prosecutors. Liz was the director on episode 6 of the series, which you can watch as a standalone piece. There's Roger Ross Williams did the first 3, Alex Gibney did another one, and Liz's is episode 6. She is focused on the prisoner Thomas Hainsworth of Richmond, Virginia. In 1984, he was 18 years old with no criminal record, but he was falsely accused of committing a string of sexual assaults. He was convicted because one of the victims of those sexual assaults, Janet Burke, swore that she could identify him. And Hainsworth went to prison for 27 years before the Innocence Project and DNA testing helped to set him free. And in Liz's episode, she interviews both Hainsworth and Janet Burke. So Liz, thank you for being here. And I wonder if you can start by describing how the Innocence Files came together with this team of you and Alex Gibney and Roger Ross Williams.
Thanks, Tom. And I know that Wolfgang Held is here amongst the listeners, and he is one of the DPs on this project. So I wanted to give him a shout out. This project came to, it's one of those things that started years ago. Adam Del Deo from Netflix mentioned it to me years ago, and it was just always on my radar. He said something, we're doing this overall deal with the Innocence Project, and we're going to have access to all of their files and cases. And are you interested? I was like, of course, and it took a long time for that to gestate, I suppose. And at a certain point, Netflix came up with the strategy of approaching 3 different filmmakers to tackle different buckets. I mean, what's wonderful about this work is it's not hopeless. It's not like, oh, these innocent folks are convicted and we don't know what goes wrong. No, we actually know what goes wrong. And we know how to prevent those mistakes from happening. 100% of the time, maybe not, but a lot more than we do already. And as you mentioned, there were different buckets for things going wrong. For me, I was really interested in this notion of eyewitness misidentification. It's that classic moment in the courtroom where, the victim or eyewitness points across the room and says, he did it. And it's the nail in the coffin. And, if you're a victim of rape, or if you saw someone murdered from 10 feet away, why wouldn't you believe that? Well, it turns out there's all kinds of ways that memories are implanted, and through no malice, people will go to their grave despite DNA, believing that a certain person did this to them despite lots of evidence. Janet Burke, you showed a picture of her. She was not the only woman who picked out Thomas Hainsworth. She was one of several rape victims. She was the only one who could deal with talking about it, actually, because it's so deeply painful. It's painful for Thomas, for his family, 27 years. It's unforgivable. You'd never get that back. And it's also painful for the victims to not get the right guy and be involved in this miscarriage of justice. So Janet, the work that she did on herself was confronting that grief and that guilt all over again, and the crime, the trauma of the rape all over again was really incredible. And of course, Thomas's willingness to forgive her and meet with her and talk with her.
I want to ask you about interviewing people who've gone through great trauma in their life, because part of telling that story and part of us understanding as an audience is to revisit that trauma. What is the kind of preparation and sensitivity that you have to bring in doing that kind of interview, asking people to go back to the worst experiences of their lives?
Yeah, I mean, it is something that a lot of us documentary filmmakers ask people to do. I guess people do it because they see a greater good coming out of it. And I guess when they're shaking and crying and need time, you remind them of that. You remind them of the fact that this story can help others and that it can help others from going through it. Sometimes that's not enough for people. Sometimes the pain is too great, or they're not able to see outside themselves in those moments. But as doc filmmakers, I think that's what we're appealing to, is, you're not, there's a larger story, and your pain is helping others, by you expressing this here.
I mean, the gestation period for a documentary is so long, it's usually a long time that those subjects who are interviewed have to wait to see the results. But now the results of the Innocence Files are out. It launched on Netflix about 10 days ago. What kind of response have you been seeing?
And I see Varda, one of the commenters, said people also heal by telling their stories. And I think that's actually such a great point. Just going back to your last question of why do we ask them these questions, and why do they talk to us? And, as you know, and I'll answer your question in a second, but I started making films in prisons. And, it's like, why were there so many folks lining up to tell their stories, right? When their stories often capture the worst moment of their lives, right? Or the thing that they have the most shame about, their worst action. And they do, because I think it is healing. And I think that's a really strong point, Varda. So thank you for making it. You asked, what's the reaction? I mean, I think that the reaction has been really positive. Janet and Thomas have been out there. They've been talking. They've held symposiums on redemption and forgiveness. They've been involved in the Innocence Project. So they had some exposure. They weren't totally raw. In the other 2 episodes that I produced that Jed Rothstein directed on Frankie Carrillo, some of those eyewitnesses, like Scotty Turner, had never talked publicly. And, doing so and acknowledging an error that cost so much was very raw and very vulnerable. And the son of the victim, Damien Sarpi, he also, having to go through the process of realizing that they had the wrong man. It was touch and go for a lot of them for a long time. So the bravery of people is, something not to be underestimated.
I want to ask you about your fiction film, Lost Girls. This is your fiction debut. It was premiered at Sundance. Now it's on Netflix. It's based on a true story about a mother who's campaigning to investigate the cases of murdered sex workers. Manohla Dargis wrote in the New York Times that the film humanizes women, often represented as disposable. Other reviews have also been full of praise. Someone had asked a question here about making that move from documentary to fiction. I'm curious, what was the biggest hurdle for you, and if you have advice for other documentary makers?
Well, I want to say it's not a move from documentary to fiction, because that implies it's a straight line that's leaving. And as some of the people in this chat know, I'm very immersed in making documentaries, so it's more circular, than that. It's so interesting. I mean, one of the things that I have to share about that experience was that, we all say documentaries are made in the edit room, right? That's the trope. Not entirely true, right? But sure, there's a lot of sculpting that goes on there. And what was so wonderful about the editing a fiction film is I was thinking, I had a script, we had continuity issues, the edit was going to be this less creative place. But as it turned out, it was a joyfully creative process in the way that it is in docs as well. You know what? If you go back to Lost Girls, you might find that there's a sweater that's, there are some continuity thing. We get away with it, right? To the service of storytelling. So for me, it was wonderful that those tools that I had developed as a documentary filmmaker were 100% at use in the edit as well. Totally different pre-production, completely different process. Where you have a very compressed period of time, with the budgets, we had a good budget, but still a very compressed period of time to get all the departments working in sync, doing their best work. And that is unlike anything I'd done in documentary. And, I was really relieved when we actually just started shooting because I was very comfortable there. And the amount of planning and, is something that's very, very different. And working with actors was something I studied and I prepared for, and I would definitely recommend doing that because you can really demystify the process. I worked with a wonderful coach, and I think there's a lot of tools you can take with you, that aren't being exercised in documentary, like the editing skills are. I'm a studier, so I did a lot of preparation.
that's one of the great joys of being a filmmaker, is that you always are getting to learn new things. So for my last question, I want to ask you about your next documentary series that's coming from HBO this summer. It's called I'll Be Gone in the Dark, based on the book by Michelle McNamara that was published posthumously with an afterword by her husband, Patton Oswalt. There's another story about serial killers and victims. Can you talk a little bit about that project, I'll Be Gone in the Dark?
It'll be out soon. We're going to be able to say when very soon, but I can't get ahead of HBO. But yeah, it's a 6-part series. I'm collaborating with some talented directors on this one as well. And what's been really Michelle McNamara was really, she's like an avatar, I think, for the lover of true crime, which has become kind of a debased, I think, our understanding of it because of, I think, I don't know, that's a longer discussion, but Michelle investigated it as like a puzzle that you're working to put all the pieces together. And her deep, deep empathy for the victims, I think, made her a very unique voice in that world. And what was so wonderful that Patton gave us was all of her voice memos, all of her tapes investigating this case, and also other unsolved mysteries before. So we're really able to have this really rich intersection between first-person archival footage, so you really feel like you're with Michelle as she's investigating this crime. Of course, we do interviews, and then we do, stylized and dramatic, I'm going to say recreations. Everybody gets those words, but it's not a person actually recreating an action, but they're much more impressionistic visuals. And I'm really excited. It's very aesthetically different than anything I've done before, and quite rich, and really excited to share with the world. And Michelle was just a wonderful voice to be working with all these years. I feel like I know her, but I did not get to know her.
Well, we can't wait to see I'll Be Gone in the Dark. I have to say, this may sound biased, but your husband, Dan Cogan, was telling me that he thinks it's your best work so far. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Liz, I hope
definitely biased.
I hope people get to see the Innocence Files and Lost Girls. Thank you very much for taking time to join us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Am I done? Are we not doing questions?
You're done.
Oh, we're done. Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye. All right, I am going to bring up our next guest, Rachel Mason, who will be joining us shortly. I just invited her in. Oops, I invited the wrong person in. Hold on, let me make sure I've got Rachel. Okay. While I'm waiting, I see her accepting and connecting. There she is.
Hello.
Hey, Rachel. Welcome from Los Angeles.
So great to be here. And I love that segment with Liz Garbus. She just was amazing. And I really am a big fan of all of her projects too. So it was awesome to hear. Yeah.
Well, let me tell people a little bit about you and your work. Rachel is an artist and a musician. Her first documentary is about her parents, Karen and Barry Mason. They owned the iconic Los Angeles store Circus of Books that was known for its deep selection of gay pornography. It's a long story how the Masons got into the business, but it was more by accident than design that they became a major distributor of gay adult films. Karen says that they were the largest in the country in the film. But it was a family secret that they kept from their synagogue friends and others. Circus of Books debuted last year at Tribeca Film Festival. It won the attention of Ryan Murphy, the television hit maker behind shows like Glee and Pose, and he became an executive producer. And the film just came out on Netflix 2 days ago. So I wanted to bring Rachel on the show for two reasons. One is that we were supposed to show Circus of Books at IFC Center last month on the 17th, but as everyone remembers, a few days before that, New York theaters were forced to close and that was the first show I had to cancel. And the second reason that I appreciate this film is that I lived in Los Angeles in the 1980s, and I used to shop at Circus of Books on Santa Monica Boulevard. I didn't have the nerve to go into the back room, but the front of the store had one of the largest selections of small press magazines in the city. And today I went to my bookshelves behind me, and I found two publications from 1988, Granta and Grand Street. I bought these at Circus of Books. I've carried them with me for the last many years. So that's my own piece of Circus of Books in my room. So,
wow.
Rachel, let me ask you, when you were growing up, how did you kind of slowly realize the extent of what your parents did?
Well, first off, that's really great that you totally know the story and we're part of the history. And it's funny, when you have a child's perspective on something, you often really just have a child's perspective. And so my mom was actually an authoritarian mother and didn't let us eat a lot of candy. And, I remember the very first thing you saw when you walked into that store was this giant candy rack. And my brothers and I would stand there and say, oh my God, there's bubble yum and there's some other stuff. And we would just be looking at the candy rack. And, that was our really big thing. And then there was an over 18 section. And I just thought every store had an over 18 section. Why wouldn't every store have she would say, you cannot go into the over 18 section. So I was like, okay, well, what do I care anyway? So when you're a kid, that's your perspective. And, that was really it. And I will say with this, I loved all the employees from an early age. And maybe this was my, again, without realizing how much I was sort of falling in love with the gay culture that I would eventually really fall in love with. I was falling in love with all these wonderful young men who are handsome and witty and funny. And it was just a really cool group of people that I admired at an early age. I thought they were great.
So in the film, your mother seems sometimes reluctant about being filmed. Can you explain what that dynamic was like between you?
Well, she was 100% totally and completely reluctant. So yes, and there's many, many, many more outtakes in the film that reveal just the small, tiny slice of what you see in the movie, where she's yelling at me and saying, "This, no one's going to ever watch this movie. Why are you doing this? And this is a bad idea. Haven't you moved on to something else?" But I'm an artist, and a lot of my projects in her mind have always been esoteric and strange and might have, okay, well, who's ever going to see this anyway? I think that was her big expectation, was like, all right, well, people in museums and galleries are not people in the mainstream. So none of my friends will ever see this, which is fine. and to her surprise, today it was in the Wall Street Journal.
So what was that, once the film was going to the Tribeca Film Festival and she realized that people were going to see this, what's been her evolution in that experience?
Well, first it was pure shock, and then horror, and then realizing her friends were all going to see this and she felt like she was being outed. And, it was really interesting that my mom went through this sort of, I don't know, you have these like 5 stages of grief when someone dies. I don't know what they are when you're the star of a film. That 5 stages of acceptance. She's a reluctant hero, and I think part of it is that she kept it a true secret. And that, that's what makes it a great movie, and her such a great subject, is that, I rode that line very hard, because obviously I knew that as a filmmaker, that's totally gold. When you have that type of extreme dichotomy in somebody with that conflict, it just happens to be my mother. And I was able to make this separation as a director, filming her, like, oh, wow, this is amazing. Okay, just keep yelling at me. That's fine. It's going to look great. But I'm able to compartmentalize myself, I suppose.
Do you have advice for other people who want to make a story about their family?
Yes, get some collaborators who you trust, because, I did not have the perspective that I needed. And I would say that, of course, there's lots of great examples, amazing examples of filmmakers that do, put themselves in their films. Of course, there's the history of it with Michael Moore, Werner Herzog. I'd love to, Sarah Polley. And the thing is, you have to get some perspective though, because there's going to be moments when, you know, I was watching the interview with my brother Josh that everyone has now said was the most poignant moment in the film. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, damn it. Why did I have to start crying there? Okay, we're going to cut that. And then my editor said, no, we're keeping that. That's really powerful. You know, and of course I'm like, oh, no, I don't want to be crying in my own film. That looks so lame. I'm not someone who does that. You know, you have these ideas in your head of what you do and don't want to be as a person. And you have to have someone else saying, nope, you are someone that does that, because people do that when someone says something powerful. Move out of your own way. And, you know, I have an incredible editor named Catherine Robson who just sat there with me holding my hand when I was freaking out about certain things. And I think that's actually what it takes, is you have to really trust your collaborators, and you have to find them. And luckily, actually, my editor had studied pornography as her thesis dissertation. She came out of academia. And so I was looking for someone that could initially have this mix, that could look at pornography in a different way. So when I found Catherine, in a way, what I realized her actual greatest skill set as a editor was the family side of things and the nuances on that. But I really hired her initially because she had this background that I thought would give her so much ability to look at pornography in a very humanistic way.
Someone had written in a question asking, after all the kind of push and pull between your mother, did she ever, you know, come to a point of acknowledgement of what you were able to accomplish with this?
You know, it's so hard and long in coming with my mother. Even today, you know, finally, actually, she saw, it was Joe Morgenstern in the Wall Street Journal wrote a glowing review, and she said, "Wow, you know, he won a Pulitzer. Okay, I better read this one." And you know, that these are smart people writing about this movie. What's going on here? You know, initially it was just this, well, no one's gonna ever see it. Okay, well, Netflix came along. Well, oh God, okay, well, hopefully it's gonna be advertised to the LGBT community on Netflix and not the whole world, you know. And so she's just slowly been coming around. And I think, you know, it's finally a recognition that thankfully I've done something that she can celebrate herself, because I think I've always, you know, as an artist, often you are, you know, we do come out of the tradition of like Van Gogh. I have to say we're outcasts in society and people don't understand us. And so truly for me, also making a documentary film that was going to have a mainstream audience and to try to make something that was understandable to people was also a very new experience for me. I come from a world of more experimental filmmaking. You know, for me, like Maya Deren, you know, people who exist in this, like, okay, she's not for everybody, but she is absolutely my hero. And there are artists like that who are my heroes in film. And I'm now in a world with the Liz Garbuses, who are actually like, no, this is going to be something that has a social impact. And I had to understand that for myself, you know, as well as my mom, this is actually a larger story. It needs to get told. And I managed to do it. So I have to say I'm a little surprised and excited that I learned that I could do this, and I love doing it.
So later we're going to hear from Loida, whose film had been selected for the Tribeca Film Festival this year, and of course couldn't happen as a live experience. Your film was at Tribeca last year, and you know, it's I think painful for people who are losing their premieres this year.
Absolutely.
But I do want to kind of, you know, go back and ask you about that sense of what that was like for you last year, and what the experience meant.
Well, you know, actually, I will say this. It really does break my heart for Loida and for all the other filmmakers. And I have a few other friends that got into Tribeca who can't premiere their film there. And I had friends that had their films at South by that couldn't premiere. And, you know, in a way, you don't know what you have until it's gone. And you're like, wow, I didn't even know I had this lucky, amazing opportunity just to simply have a premiere, because people have done it for the entire history of film festivals. That's the thing that we all got to do. So I'm, you know, I just want to send my condolences in a way. I feel this like grief, but at the same time, the weirdest thing is happening right now. And I have to say this as a maybe like silver lining to all the people out there who are not getting their festival premieres. First off, my festival situation was so interesting because this is such a social film. It's about people who knew and loved not just the store, but what it really felt like to be ostracized. I had that in so many of the gay film festivals, which is why festivals like Outfest, Frameline, Inside Out, all the Q Docs, these incredible gay film festivals. I really support them so much. And I of course love the Tribecas of the world, but what it means for the gay community to sit there and watch something that is still so fresh, like the wounds are fresh. Especially the older men in the audience remember what that was like to get their magazines. And so I had this cathartic reaction when people were watching the movie and they were like, oh my God, that's Jeff Stryker. There was this visceral sense of like, we were all in this together. And, it breaks my heart that at least for now, maybe there's a whole different world in a year from now that we'll find ways to do more theatrical events. But, it is heartbreaking to think of the films, and especially the queer films, that aren't going to necessarily have that. And so I just want to say, first off, I have this appreciation for the experience I got. And I really feel like, wow, I'm beyond lucky. I just feel that, gay angels were shining their light on this movie and, doing what they could. And it really brought the community together. The next thing, though, is that what's happening right now, literally as we speak on Twitter right now, is like the Circus of Books hashtag is trending, and who would have thought there are people all over the world, India, Brazil. I'm just getting messages from people who are watching at a level that they wouldn't be watching had we all had all kinds of fun things to do on a Saturday night and go to bars and do all kinds of stuff. So there's a possibility, if your film is coming out right now, for a different type of audience engagement. And I do think we're sitting in these worlds where people are figuring out just like this right now. It's so cool. People are typing in the sidebar, and if we were in an audience, I wouldn't know that like D-Mag right here is saying Circus of Books opening night in LA was amazing. Thank you. How cool. I saw Liz refer back to people on the sidebar. It's a really interesting shift. And I think if you're willing to roll with what's happening right now, as you are doing, Thom, with like interviewing people, and still, we're like flowing with this new moment. So it's a horrific tragedy. And I'm also just devastated for the lives that are being lost right now. And it actually harkens back to the AIDS crisis. It's very strange to me and surreal and sad. And I'm, feeling actually a lot of heartbreak. But at the same time, I think something is happening in our culture that we're being forced to observe and be a part of. And it's a different kind of community effort. And I really also see people coming together more, strangely.
Well, I thank you for those thoughts. I'm going to let you go, but I appreciate this film so much. I hope that people get to see it on Netflix. And thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody commenting. I'll say a nice appreciation right after.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel.
Great.
All right. Oops, I cut her off. I'm going to bring in Loida right now. Well, just a second, I'm going to wait for you on screen. Yeah. So while you're accepting and connecting, according to this, whoa, there she is. Hello, Loida.
Hey, Thom, how are you?
Good, thank you. So let me say a few words about Loida before I start asking her some questions. She is the Senior Vice President of Firelight Media's programs. That's the documentary center that's led by Stanley Nelson and Marcia Smith. She's also known as DJ Lalo, co-producing a party called Rosie Perez and its dance events. Something I've always wanted to get to, but I'll have to wait until this is over to live that dream. And over the years at Doc NYC, we've closely followed Firelight Media's fellowship program, and Loida's always been a great resource in recommending talent. I'm sure there are many viewers right now who've been touched by Loida's work, and I encourage you to speak up in the comments section. Last summer, Loida, I saw you at Philadelphia's Black Star Festival, and that's when I first heard that you were making this film of your own that you've been working on for several years. It's called Through the Night. It's about a 24-hour childcare service in, whoops, that's not it. Where are you? There it is. through the child care service is in New Rochelle, New York, run by a husband and wife team, Dolores and Patrick Hogan. And most of their clients are single mothers working hard jobs like a nurse or a supermarket employee. As I mentioned, this was selected for the Tribeca Film Festival. It was supposed to be having its world premiere last weekend. Got a great review in The Hollywood Reporter. And what makes me extra sad about the delay in showing this film to an audience is that it's so timely right now. New Rochelle, where it's set, was the first flashpoint for COVID-19 in New York. And I think now we're all recognizing, maybe showing greater appreciation for the vital jobs of nurses and supermarket employees that are keeping us going while everything else is stopped. And every parent has a deeper appreciation for childcare right now, that we're all doing a lot more of it. There's a moment in the film that a line that really struck me, and that's Dolores, the caretaker, who's at the heart of the film, says, "This is the way the world is set up at this point." And I can't deliver that with the same poetry of her expression, but I keep thinking about that line whenever I look at the news. This is the way the world is set up at this point. And Loida, your film really eloquently shows how the world is set up and who carries the burden of that arrangement. So I want to start by asking you, what drew you to the story of Dolores Hogan in the first place?
Sure. And hi, I see a bunch of friends and family in the chat. So nice to see you all here. And thanks again for the invitation, Tom. So what drew me initially was actually, I'm part of a mother's group. I'm a parent myself. I'm a single mom. I have 2 young children who are currently tied up and have some duct tape over their mouths in the back so that we could do this interview. Just joking, not really. Kind of, sort of. And someone that I went to college with actually posted an article featuring the daycare that is in our film. And when I read through the stories, it immediately made me think of my own childhood and a lot of the current things that I was facing and my present life as a mother. Stories of my friends, my neighbors. Growing up, my mother worked as a home health aide, and she worked the night shift. So she would work from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And so, it's like the article just really kind of made me flash directly back to my own childhood. And then the second sort of thought that I had was, this is the reality for so many women, especially women of color, and more specifically Black and Latina women. Yet it's so invisible. It's something that's invisible in parenting spaces. It's something that's invisible in women's conversations and women's groups. It's just kind of overlooked, but an experience that's shared by so many people. And I just felt really compelled to share that. But I think if I'm honest, part of what made me the driving force, behind making the film was also just trying to reckon with some of the really kind of internal difficult things that we navigate as parents, and particularly as single parents. There's so much kind of, the stakes are high. You got these people that you're responsible for, and you don't have a ton of support. You have a society that actually does the opposite. There's a lot of kind of space for criticism and stigma and judgments as opposed to for support. So I think, at once I wanted to tell this story that feels like a very kind of broader shared experience of a lot of women of color. But then I think I was also trying to work through some of my own internal issues as well.
So, you brought a lot of lived experience to the story. What were the things that making the film helped you work out, or what were the things that you learned along the way?
Yeah, so, one of the things that I set out to do initially was to really make a film that is about our everyday lives, not a film that is about social problems or it's not a film that's like focusing on the crises in our lives. It was a film that really wanted to cast a lens on just the everyday of this experience, and not only what the experience looks like, but what the experience feels like. So really kind of searching for an interiority of lens and of gaze. Just, I think, partially for me, trying to, in witnessing the lives and the everyday of other women who I see as mirrors of myself and of my experience, as people that I see as my sisters, in witnessing their everyday, also trying to kind of understand more about my everyday. And I, one of the things that I am most proud of is that I do feel like we ended up embarking on a collective journey. The full team that worked on the project it's an all women of color team, from our DP to our sound recordist, our producer, editor, APs, everybody. Again, there was this kind of like, we were all mirrors for each other and could really kind of relate and connect in this kind of very profound way, that I think the process of making the film and the final film itself ended up being revelatory. So I think things change for each of us in terms of how we see ourselves, but how we see each other. And that for me is one of the things that I'm proudest of this kind of in this journey.
You talked about in the press notes that I read that, you've spent all these years at Firelight Media helping other people make their projects, but you felt a little held back. I think you used the word insecure about taking ownership of your own project, which I think, something that any filmmaker, it's kind of when they're starting out a project, especially their first project, feels like, who am I to call myself a filmmaker? Can you talk about, that experience for you and what it took what you learned from getting over it?
Yeah, sure. I think as a woman, it's like easy to fall into the role of being someone else's support, or assistant. I think we're socialized that way. I think it can be much harder for us to see that our ideas and our vision, our dreams, our goals are just as worthy of being centered as anyone else's. So I think for me, and I also, before I went into film, I came from a background in community organizing, which, again, it's like, you're behind the scenes. It's about creating space and facilitating spaces for others to lead. And so for me, it was not my kind of not normal, natural default to say, what I want to do or what I think is important is actually important, and it's worth me believing in it myself and putting energy and resources towards it. But then more concretely, the real kind of block was I could not figure out how I was going to make a film as a parent of 2 young children while working a full-time job. I am the sole provider, so I don't, I'm not in a position where I could freelance and patch stuff together and, whatever, wait for things to come in. Like, I don't have that flexibility at this juncture in my life. And there's no one else's income to, float me or whatever. And so I was like, where's the time, right? So actually my company's name is Third Shift Media because I did make the film on my third shift. I worked on it at nighttime after my kids would go to bed. So I get my kids to school, go to work, come home, do homework, dinner, bath, bed, whatever, then work on the film. I'd work on it on weekends, on holidays. So yeah.
Amazing. And somehow also did your DJ work.
Yeah, well, that's like my fix. That's my therapy space. That's like where I kind of get to be untethered. And so that's the one thing that I really needed and to maintain in my life to keep me going.
So someone wrote in a question asking about, where the film is going from here. I know that it has a distribution deal that I think is yet to be announced. But I'm wondering how you're assessing, the next few months. Normally your film will be playing other festivals. Now some of these festivals are moving online. Have you gotten any kind of grip on that yet, or is it still too early to tell?
I would say it's too early to tell. What I am kind of falling into, so it's like interesting because the piece around like losing festivals, I haven't really felt that grief. I almost haven't had the luxury to be honest. As a native New Yorker who like lives in the Bronx and is from the Black and brown communities that are now being talked about as this like faceless mass that is disproportionately dying and being impacted by COVID-19. I'm part of that community, right? Like I grew up in the South Bronx. So all of my elders are in New York City. So I've had so many family members that have been sick and been trying to like navigate how to support people kind of despite the public health guidelines that actually I find to be not useful or relevant at all. So to give you an example, my mother was sick with COVID and ended up needing to be hospitalized. She lives in the South Bronx. Her local hospital is Lincoln Hospital. If I had called an ambulance for her, they would have taken her to Lincoln Hospital. That hospital on a good day is overwhelmed and under-resourced. In the middle of a pandemic, it's like sending your family there is a death sentence. So I was not going to send my mother in an ambulance to Lincoln Hospital, right? So what were my other options? There was no like guidance anywhere, around like how do you keep your people alive? How do you care for your people in this moment? The folks in the daycare are all, are in the film. They're all essential workers. All of them, Marisol, Shanona, Nunu, Patrick, all of them are working. So I'm like talking to them every couple of days, checking in on them. It's like I'm surrounded by it because again, my community is the community that is being disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. So like the festival thing, I'm kind of like, yeah, I know it's a thing, but like who the hell has the time to grieve that or mourn that, right? When we are surrounded by so much tragedy and so much death at our doorsteps. And actually being, if I'm honest, again, being a little bit consumed by a sense of anger that even in this moment where we are talking about essential workers, we are talking about them again as faceless, kind of one-dimensional people. We're not really still seeing them as like fully human. We're talking about their deaths, which again, in this country is something that we're really comfortable doing. We're comfortable seeing Black and brown people being killed. We've seen it like literally, physically, all those kind of footage of police brutality and police murders and all of, so, and we're used to seeing, dead bodies of folks in Palestine and, whatever. So, I feel like there is this way in which even when these folks are at the center of the conversation, they're still not being fully seen in their full humanity and complexity. And that rage around that is kind of consuming me right now. So like, that's what I'm thinking and kind of living in this moment. And then in terms of the film, really focusing on maintaining the relationships, and the connections to the folks that have made the film, the protagonists, and also the people who are going to potentially be our partners in helping this tool lead to some sort of concrete change. So that, again, everybody's like talking about hopefully we'll emerge out of this better and more human because we're seeing like all these things. And I'm like skeptical. I don't think that that's like a given because clearly we're comfortable with certain people being sacrificed, because we need our groceries. So it's a right, and that they got to go to work and we don't really care who's taking care of their kids or like what's happening, right? So all these things, I realize that's a bit of a monologue that I just went on right there. But, just to sort of say like in this class of 2020 of filmmakers that are not having their festival premieres, even within that experience, depending on where you sit in the world and what body you're living in, we're all experiencing that in very, very different ways.
Well, thank you very much for giving us that very, real perspective from the Bronx, because I think, when everyone's at home, we're all living our own experiences, and and it is hard to see other people's experiences. I do think that the film Through the Night, does perform that power of documentary film to help you, experience a life that you wouldn't otherwise. So I really look forward to people getting to see this film. Can you talk about, in the wider Firelight community of, I know Firelight has been, leading webinars, helping people try to, think about ways to apply for the small business loans. And you've got your William Greaves Fund open for applications. And what else is, what are you kind of hearing from that community?
Yeah, we are hearing primarily, and this I hope is not news to any of us, that the same sort of fissures and gaps that existed before in our society are only exacerbated by this pandemic. So even in the kind of emergency responses and, all of that, and we could see that with the small business loans, right? Where the big chain businesses actually got the small business loans instead of the small businesses that really need them to survive, that is being replicated in our industry and in our space, right? Like the people that are already best positioned just normally and not normally, in kind of regular times, whatever that is, are still the people that are best positioned now. And so that those issues still exist. And that, again, because we work with filmmakers of color, across the country, in all of around the country, that the story is the same. The narrative is the same. I just saw an article yesterday that was talking about COVID cases in the Navajo Nation being more than the 13 states surrounding it. Just one community in upstate New York of the Navajo community, having more cases than 13 states combined. It's and again, these stories we're kind of getting this information in hodgepodge ways, and if anything, it makes us think about how centering the people that are most directly impacted by all of the social, political problems that are endemic in our society continues to be, if not more pressing than ever, right? Because we see that when it's well-meaning people, but not directly impacted people that are leading everything and have access to all the resources, a lot of people get left behind. Because you can be well-meaning, but if you're not coming from a community that's directly impacted, you have a lot of blind spots, and we all do as human beings, right? But, if you think about privilege and oppression on a spectrum, those that have more access to privilege are gonna have more blind spots. And their design and their thinking is going to leave more people behind and leave more people out, right? And so that is happening in the documentary community, So I think one thing I would love for us here in this space to really be thinking about is that, how do we leave this moment with a real mandate around shifting, what our standards are in the community, what our best practices are, again, as a field that, while every documentary is not about a social issue, documentaries are known for, tackling social issues. We are known as a space that primarily deals with, interrogation of power and, examining the thornier sides of the human experience, right? That's what we're known for. So I feel the same kind of reckoning that we're asking to happen in other parts of our society, we should apply to ourselves as well, and look at the opportunities that we have to get it right or get it better,
I think it's a very powerful question you're asking there, and we could leave it there, but I'm curious to know, are there, to take that thought further, do you have specific ideas about, what you would like to see from the documentary community?
Yeah, so at Firelight, one thing that we've been, thinking about a lot, and again, I'm just going to be real and honest and transparent, because I don't have the bandwidth to sugarcoat right now. But just thinking about the kind of major institutions in our industry are all predominantly white-led institutions with predominantly white boards, right? Like the whole sort of power structure is not reflective of who we are as a country still in 2020 in the documentary field, right? And so I think what we're thinking about at Firelight and what we've always thought about at Firelight as our role is to partially disrupt, you know, those spaces and continuously raise the conversations and the issues that people would rather not have because they're uncomfortable, but not stopping there, and also really building deeper and stronger relationships with all of the sort of people of color-led groups that have emerged in our field in the last several years. So we're thinking about how do we support, contribute more, just build, you know, POC film festivals, you know, the new collectives that have emerged throughout the country. Like there's like folks from Fem Frontera that are working. It's the collective of Latina women filmmakers working in and around the border, the US-Mexico border in Texas. You know, the folks at Third Horizon in Florida, Black Star, Cousin, which is a Native and Indigenous filmmaking collective, the New Negro Society. Like there's a lot of other folks, you know. I was set to premiere at Tribeca, which is a great, you know, platform, but I have to say, like, Sundance and Tribeca are not the only game in town. And the more that we all collectively invest our energy and our resources and our belief in these other spaces and decentralize the field, I think the stronger that the field will become. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about at Firelight that I also personally deeply believe in as potential solutions.
Well, thank you. I mean, those are, you know, it's great to hear that. It was, you know, it was a great experience for me to be at Black Star last summer and to experience the energy that's going on there. And, you know, you and Stanley and Marcia and the whole team at Firelight have created such a fantastic institution. I know that there's, you know, so many people who are deeply appreciative of what you do. We're deeply appreciative of what you do. I'm very much looking forward to the day when we can reopen theaters and we can show through the night and we can, you know, bring some of those communities together and you know, see this wonderful film for what it is on the big screen.
Thank you, Thom. I really appreciate that. And my team is texting me that I should ask everyone here to follow Through the Night on social media. It's like Through the Night Doc on some channels, or throughthenightfilm.com is our website. Sign up for the newsletter.
The Twitter is through THRU the night.
Yes, yeah. And if you sign up for our newsletter, we're going to be sending out a bunch of like information and updates too around like what's happening with the protagonists in the film, and also really starting to think about how we can concretely use the community of support around the film to lead to concrete support for the people in the film. So we welcome you to join us, and folks are posting it. Doc NYC, thank you for putting the website in there. So yeah, and thank you again for having me.
All right, thank you. You know, we just pulled this together this week, and I had emailed Loida on, I think, Monday night, and I think you got back to me at midnight on Monday saying I can do it, which is that third shift that you were working. So I'm really glad that we could make this happen, and we're going to keep on rooting for this film.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Okay. Take care.
Stay safe and healthy, everyone.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to wrap this up. I do want to give a big thanks to IFC Films Unlimited, the subscription site that is our sponsor. It's home to great documentaries, dramas, and comedies. It's available in the US and Canada. You can get the app on Apple TV or subscribe on Amazon Prime. And also you can start next week with Doc NYC's Monday Memo. You can receive it for free and sign up for it at docnyc.net. We deliver you all the week's documentary news. This was our first Friday Fix, but we've got another one coming next week. I'll be joined by Janet Tobias. She spent 3 years ago, she made the film Unseen Enemy that put her on the front lines of pandemics. She was in Africa during the Ebola crisis, and her film really foretold what we're going through now. She wrote to me just yesterday, "This is one of those things I wanted to be really wrong about." So next week, we'll get the insights from Janet. I'll also talk to Julia Reichert and Stephen Bognar, who won the Oscar for their documentary American Factory. I think they're going to be perfect guests for May 1st and International Workers' Day. And lastly, we're going to connect with Gordon Quinn of Kartemquin Films in Chicago. He was hospitalized with a serious case of COVID-19, but he emailed me this week and said he hopes to call in after he's discharged from the hospital on Monday. So we look forward to hearing from Gordon. Please be here. You can RSVP for episode 2 at the button below. More on Friday Fix. Please tell your friends. The show has been recorded and will stay available for free at this link. Thanks to the Doc NYC team, Sarah Modo, Caitlin Boyle, and Raphael Nehausen. As Dolores Hogan says in Through the Night, this is the way the world is set up at this point. So while we can't gather in person, we do hope to see you next Friday for your Friday Fix. Thanks for being here.